Hello, Space Cadets. This is Commander Ryan speaking. We're going to learn today about outposts. I am currently on the moon in an outpost on the moon. An outpost is just a faraway place from home where you can keep an eye on important things. In this case, I'm keeping an eye on Earth as best I can. In chess, an outpost looks like these three squares with circles. An outpost is when a pawn guards a square that no enemy pawn can attack. So you'll notice that in this situation, this square is an outpost because no black pawn can attack it. So white has three outposts where they could have a pawn guarding a piece that the black pawns cannot attack. Black also has three outposts, here, here, and here, because you'll notice their bishop could come around and go to, any of these three squares if they wanted to. So both sides have an opportunity for outposts. So let's look at a couple of different ones. So the first one we can look at is knight b5. This outpost is guarded by the pawn, and the knight is able to threaten to capture this pawn. That means either the king or the bishop are going to have to keep guarding this pawn, no matter what. They can't really move it forward because then you could just take and have a free pawn. So by attacking this pawn, one of these two pieces is always going to have to watch over the pawn. So here's another example. Knight d5. This outpost is very centralized. And you'll notice that the knight has 8 different squares it can move to. Not all of them are good, but you can see the knight, his full power and full range of mobility can be experienced by the middle. So that would be the advantage to this outpost. Now, if we do a few silly moves real quick, or no, maybe not that one. That would be very silly. Actually, hold on. Let's start that over. Let's go here. He'll attack me, and then I'll go here, and then he'll go back. Okay, so let's say we had our knight on this outpost instead. You'll notice that it attacks this pawn just like when the knight was over here, and it also has 8 squares of movement. If we go, again, not all those squares are good, but it does have 8 squares of movement. And you can see the difference between these two positions because look, right here, we only have 6 squares of movement. So if we go back and forth a bit, to this position here, let's put our arrows back. I didn't mean to clear them out. I'm sorry. I do make errors sometimes. But yeah, so when you go between the two, you can see that both of the knights in these positions attack this pawn on d6, but the knight over here has way more options, and it's a much better piece this way. So this is our best outpost because we have 8 squares of movement, and we can attack this pawn at the same time. This outpost gives us only 6 squares of movement, and this outpost gives us 8 squares of movement, but we're not attacking the pawn. So when we go all the way back to the beginning and we look at these 3 options, you can see that we now understand why this one is best. So before we move on with outposts, it's very important to understand that if you have more than one outpost, consider which one is best. Your outpost should always be watching over something. In this case, we want to watch over this pawn. And the best place to do it from is right here on f5. Okay, let's look at another example of a knight outpost. So right here, we've got 2 outposts. Now, white is going to win this game because they have these 3 pawns. One of them is going to go become a queen, and that's going to be how white wins. However, white has to be careful to not allow this pawn to go become a queen. Allowing that pawn to become a queen could be a problem. Even more importantly is if this pawn moves forward and white takes it, black will then have two pawns that can move to go try to become a queen. And that is a double problem that we don't want to have. So we can definitely win with these pawns. However, if we go here, we're on an outpost, and you'll notice that if they try to move their pawn, actually they have to get a check first. So let's say we move our pawn forward and they try to run down, you'll see we're watching the square. So this knight right here is blocking the b7 pawn from moving. This pawn is blocking the c6 pawn from moving, and this knight is defended by the pawn, and this knight is watching the a4 square. So if black ever tries to get a queen, we can take it. So this outpost is designed to watch all three of these pawns and make it very difficult for black to create a queen. And so then now what white will do is move all their pawns up and their king up, and then eventually make a queen and win the game. So this outpost is watching pawns and keeping them from going anywhere. But what does it look like when a bishop has an outpost? Right here. Really simple. The coolest part about a bishop on an outpost is the pawn guards the bishop and the bishop guards the pawn. So these two are very safe. And you'll notice that no matter what we do, if we go here, this is not really a threat because that's worth 3. The bishop is worth 3 points, and the rook is worth 5 points. So trading the rook for the bishop would be very foolish because you would lose 5 points but only get 3 points. So this would be very bad for black if that happened. So therefore, the bishop outpost is special because the pawn always guards the bishop and the bishop guards the pawn. So that's a very good benefit of a bishop outpost. A rook outpost seems kind of weird, but they do exist. Here we go. We move our rook here. This is a very good rook move. Basically, in this position, this rook is attacking 2 different pawns and possibly a third pawn if the d pawn moves forward. And again, all of these pawns are guarded right now, so that's not the scary part. The main idea is, as long as this rook is being really frustrating and guarding everything, black has to keep everything defended. Black has no way to really continue their defense very well. Their best way is to move their rooks up and move a rook over so that it can be traded off. However, there's still some problems with that. So anyway, but that's what a rook outpost looks like. The pawn guarding the rook, and no pawns can attack the rook. That rook is very happy sitting right there. Now, what is the purpose of an outpost? I told you the main purpose is an outpost is about watching over something. But there's other reasons to make outposts too. You'll notice in this position, we have 3 different outposts shown by white, where we have a pawn right here guarding a rook, a pawn guarding a bishop, and a pawn guarding a knight. All of these are just fine. Black has some outposts too, but black is losing. But technically this square is an outpost, although the rook could just take the pawn. These 2 squares are also outposts, although the bishop would capture right here. So this is really black's only outpost. And to get to it, they would have to do this, this, and that. But they could also take the pawn if they get down there. So let's look at 4 reasons for why an outpost is important. So the first one is to stay safe from attacks. So if this king were to come down like this, the pawn keeps this knight safe, so the king cannot capture the knight. The second reason for an outpost is to put a piece really far into the opponent's territory. So right here, this is the 6th rank, and that's on black side of the board. And so white has put a piece really far into black's territory. Um, a third reason is to block open files. So you'll notice there's an open file right here. An open file is any file without pawns on it. But you'll notice that the bishop is stopping the rook from being able to come to these two back squares. So blocking files is a really good reason for an outpost. And finally, if an outpost is done properly, your piece should be safe from capture. So either, like I pointed out with the king trying to capture the knight, which wouldn't work because then the king would put himself in check by the pawn. Another example is if the rook takes the bishop, well, the pawn can recapture. And the rook is not going to be very happy in that situation because it will have lost 5 points for 3 points only. So that's not usually pretty good. So let's look at some very, very, very good examples of each of these. So this is very similar to our starting position where the knight is in the middle of the board and he's pretty much invincible. You'll notice, when you're invincible, nothing can hurt you. So in this situation, you'll notice the king cannot really come down and take the knight because that would put the king in check by one of white's pawns. And the dark square bishop cannot attack a light square. So a lot of times an outpost is about being invincible. And so having an invincible piece can be a big advantage. Here's another example. Having multiple targets. Our previous rook outpost example, we had multiple targets. In this one, it's kind of the same thing. We have multiple targets. You'll also notice it's kind of an invincible piece. The king cannot take it because if he did, the pawn would put him in check and you cannot move your king into check. If they attack the rook with the knight, which they can do, well, currently the knight is defending the pawn, but if it goes to attack the rook, then the rook can just take the pawn. So for example, knight to here, rook takes. So if there's no way to really attack this rook without losing a pawn. So black is in big trouble here. This is not a good position to be in. And the rook is doing very well.